Alright, so today I'm going to talk about Marie Kondo. A lot of people like her methods, but there are just a few things that I disagree with. Overall, I feel like Marie Kondo has a very simple formula for tidying up. It's just a little too simple in some instances. I think it's a good starting point, but there are a few flaws that I would like to point out. It seems like a lot of people worship Marie Kondo, and she could do no wrong. There's very few negative or just reviews of her in a really critical eye. And I just got a list that I'll just go through. There are certain things I disagree with in her book. So the first is cutting off tags off of your clothes, like when you first buy them. She says it gives you a sense of ownership, so you own the clothes. And she feels like you would wear it more if you just cut off the tags, the initial cut off. I feel like it just doesn't necessarily work. Just because if you don't wear it in 2 weeks and you still have the tags on, go ahead and return it. That's probably a better use of money. Or personally for me, I feel like it's comparing it to like a car. Once you drive it off the lot, half the value is cut. Same thing with clothing. If you cut off the tags, half the value is just cut off if you don't wear it. So go ahead and resell it. It resells much better if you keep the tags on the clothes. And then the next thing is, she says throw out all backups, toilet paper, aluminum foil, anything like that. I agree to a certain extent. Like for makeup and things, you probably should be hoarding a lot of it. But for things like toilet paper, I think it's harmless to have a stockpile of that. She's correct in a sense that you shouldn't have too many backups. However, I think in real life, it's okay to have backups. She makes it like a very negative idea to have backups. She disses the idea, like, you should never have backup of underwear. She was like, it would get discolored, like, it's not as good. So that's another thing that I just found a little weird. But it's just up to the person. I wouldn't follow her book like exactly as she writes it. Just pick out pieces that you agree with and incorporate that in your life. The other thing is her type of folding. I thought it was just a little bizarre. Like, I get it. Like, you want your clothes to show, but there are better ways to organize your clothes. I would want my closet to look like a boutique. I want it really beautiful to look at. I think color coordination is still great. I just don't like her way of folding. I will link other videos that I'll make of how I fold my clothes. I think it just looks a little more pleasing to the eye, and kind of just gives the same effect. All the clothes is still showcased. It's just a different method. Her weird, from, I guess, like, she wants like a feather out closet hanging style. So your heaviest items and then the lightest items. It just looks really awful. I've seen other YouTubers do their closet clean out. I think it was just really a sore eye just to stare at that, and it's just like one big mess. It looks like you went to like Ross or something. It just looks really not pleasing to the eye. I would just separate it out by either color or at least type. So like all the dresses here, all the shirts here. But no, for hers it's just one from heaviest to lightest, like this weird feathering of clothing. And then the next big thing in her book is she asks us the question, does it spark joy? I think it's a good starting point. However, it's not necessarily I guess the end all that will solve all your problems, because I've run into some problems. Like for Abercrombie jeans, yeah, it did spark joy, but did it fit me? No, it didn't. So little things like that. I really wanted to keep it, but I couldn't. I just sold it off Poshmark. I listed it, it's still on there. And then the next thing is, like, for a lot of people, something mundane as like a toothbrush, it doesn't spark joy. But you use it, so you're going to keep it. And then for the other extreme, some people only find yoga pants comfy, and that sparks joy. So are they going to throw out their whole work closet? Are they going to throw out everything they own? Probably not possible. I think in her second book, she kind of goes around this question by inserting another chapter that says, before cleaning up, reflect. Before you start, what do you want your end goal to be? So you're not just asking, does this spark joy? But also, in addition to that, you're asking, will this be one step closer to my end goal? So there's like a two-step process. And then for overall, for the whole book, it's very Japanese oriented. So most of this, when you're reading this as an American, it doesn't make sense. Some people think it's just weird translation. I don't think so. It's just culturally, Japan is like a little bit more soft of a type of culture, while Americans really like very blunt, I guess. But she has a lot of respect for her items as if they're a living thing. So it's just odd to imagine like a pair of shoes thanking your shoes for protecting your feet. I don't necessarily think that will work with a lot of people. Like, sure, you could appreciate your shoes, but going far as thanking them, that's a little excessive. The next thing I thought was a little bit odd was her categories. Like, it kind of made sense. Like, she has her clothing, her books, her papers, miscellaneous, and then sentimental. I think it varies for a lot of people. For me personally, I would reorder it a little differently. I never liked books, so I would declutter all my books before anything else. I just had a weird phobia, like as a kid. Always hated reading, never enjoyed it. During silent reading times, I would just like fake read, just stare at the book, look at the pretty pictures. Never really read for 10 minutes. I also dreaded raising my hands, or like reading out loud. Hated it. Hated when teachers called on me to read that paragraph. I'd stutter over words, not feel comfortable at all. Hated it. So I would totally just declutter books first in my list. And then for papers, never really held on to much papers. Well, besides scrapbooking, but for like catalogs and things like that, I just chuck them. For instructional books, chuck them. I never really had to hang on to those things, but for receipts I would hang on for at least, probably at least 2 months until it's totally bad and then I'd throw it out. And then the next category for me personally would be probably clothing. It's really hard for me to let go of clothing just because I've been in retail for about 5 years, really loved fashion. So it's just a little hard to slowly declutter and get rid of stuff. Lastly would be probably sentimental items. I guess going back before that, I said I hated books. There's only like 4 books I actually keep, and that is my yearbooks. I like them. Even though my picture's in there, not the most flattering. But I like staring at it. I think in like 75 years or so, I'd like staring at it and then just remembering high school life and things like that. So I would say for the categories in general, it just varies from person to person. Her categories is just very generic, but she assumes that all people are like this, which is not necessarily true. You should have different, you know, like how Goosebumps, they are like, turn this page if you're blah blah blah, or like create your own kind of book and adventure. Her book should be more like that. So for a person like me, I hated books, so I would make clearing out all my books to the first category because it would be so easy for me just to check out all the books. Books are growing on me, but I don't really still have that relationship, like a really positive relationship with books. So I think for her, it should have been more catered towards the individual person and not just society as a whole, and how her method is the most correct. The last part of her book, she mentions like nobody has ever failed. I think the statement's really not true. Either she's really full of herself or she doesn't really understand reality. If you give this book, or if she comes to a person like, she comes in with a proposal for, say, the TV show Hoarders, she cannot apply the same method to hoarders. It just won't work. They have like mental connection issues with their items. So if you empty out a house, they'll just go back out in the street and just go grab more stuff because they feel very empty. They don't like feeling empty. It might be more psychological problems that Marie Kondo doesn't address or say in her book. So if you have like, this will work only if you're like quote unquote normal person. So if you have any attachment issues or any mental, I guess, problems you had, Marie Kondo probably would not work for you. I just can't imagine this, like her helping some individual from hoarders. I noticed when I was doing a little bit of research as well, for Marie Kondo now she has kids, so maybe it will induce a third book, I guess, in her case. Just because she has kids now, I was wondering if her thoughts or views has changed since having kids, because they are messier in general. So kind of wonder if that has an impact on her life and how she views decluttering as a whole. Lastly, I would say there's only one really big negative for minimalism culture in general. It's be careful of how you declutter your items. For things like old laptops, computers, sensitive information, you have to dispose of it correctly. I noticed, like, I watched one YouTube video. He loved the idea of decluttering, but he had such a negative experience just because he decluttered his old laptops, and they had really sensitive information in there, so his identity got stolen, which is not what you want. So definitely just dispose of those things correctly. Either give it as a hand-me-down, or you might have to go to a recycling shop to have it properly, all that data extracted and destroyed. But it's really hard to do, especially you cannot fully feel safe that your information is loose out there. So definitely the idea of just buying less. And then one last thing I want to mention is Marie Kondo. Her whole book is just, it sounds very happy life. It sounds like there's no problem with just buying a whole lot of stuff as long as you declutter as well. But in a society we live in, we should be thinking, like, we should be careful of what we're buying and bringing into our house, rather than saying it's okay to buy a lot, just throw it out as well. So it's a really wasteful mindset to think of. Because constantly you could be bringing in clothes, like once every day or something, and then asking yourself, does it spark joy? Maybe a day or two pass and now it doesn't spark joy. Now just go ahead and chuck it. It sounds like a very, not a good advice to live on. Her whole book kind of gives you a sense like, oh, if you're not happy with it, go ahead and chuck it, rather than repurpose it or anything like that. If it doesn't make you happy, chuck it. So it's just not a very sustainable way to think. So I just keep that in the back of my head as well. So Marie Kondo sets up a good foundation of, I guess, guidelines to push you towards minimalism. They're like baby steps. It just kind of gives you a good outline of how she's done it, but it might not necessarily work for everyone. So I just keep that in mind. So hopefully you found this kind of helpful in analyzing her book. And you're not alone if you think some points are not 100% there. For a more realistic approach, I read the book, The Swedish Death Cleaning, as well. It just seems more personal, it seems more realistic. Basically, her concept is, like, once you hit, like, about 50 or middle age, like, you're about to drop dead, actively try to get rid of your items. It's one last chance to be with your items, and then go ahead and try to give it to a new home, or try to just give it away, just to alleviate the pain for your family so they don't have to deal with that. So that is it for my video. Hopefully you found this kind of insightful.